This video is brought to you by our amazing supporters over at Patreon. Hey everyone, it's Ben from Board to Bits, and now that we have some background music playing in our game, we're actually going to use our settings and our player preferences to control that value. So how we do this is that we're going to set up a system where when we save our values, it's actually going to set our volume, but we're not going to set it through the actual background music player, because then we'd have to, kind of find a way to reach this object. We do have that singleton instance of it, but as we've seen with our play session manager, that can sometimes lead to some confusion in terms of which instance is the right one to use. So instead, we're going to use a system that Unity has built into it called an audio mixer to control our background music and our sound effects volumes. So I have jumped back to the settings menu because this is really where we're going to be controlling this. But what I want to do is I want to jump to audio, and I want to create a new audio mixer. And this creates this asset you'll see with these sliders, kind of looks like a soundboard that you would see in a recording studio. And I'm going to simply call this main mixer. Now, audio mixers are a little bit of a unique asset in Unity because they exist outside of any of your scenes. They're sort of like a static class in that they don't have to be placed into a scene to work. You can reference them from any scene at any time. You can reference them using variables, but they never actually get attached to an object. They just get used as a variable, kind of like you would use a scriptable object. So if we double click on the mixer, you'll see that it opens up this new tab, Audio Mixer, for you. And if you're not familiar with the audio mixers, we're going to go through this step by step and kind of talk through what they do. So basically what happens with an audio mixer is anything that is any audio source that is assigned to the audio mixer will pass its sound into this mixer, and here you can apply different volume controls as well as different effects. We're just going to be using volume controls right now though. And you start off with just a single master group, but you can add more to it, and that's what we're going to do. The master is always going to be the root. There can't be any other groups at this level. But when we add a group, you'll see that pops up as a child of the master, and this one is called new group. We're going to rename this to BGM for background music. Now, be sure to click on master again, and then hit the plus sign here, and it'll create another child. If you click it while you're on BGM, it's going to create a child of BGM, and we don't want that. So go back to master and then click, and this one's going to be for our sound effects. So I'll just call this SFX. If you do by accident set it up so that it becomes a child, do know that you can just kind of drag these around much like you would objects in the hierarchy, and that way you can set it up so that they are these two are siblings of one another. That way they can work independently. So with these, we need to do one more thing so that we can actually control these in script. Normally by script you can't actually go into a single group and set its volume. However, if you click on the BGM group here, and then you notice in your inspector that it's referencing, that's odd that it's referencing there we go. It should be referencing that same group. Apparently if you're dragging these around, it might work a little bit oddly, but just give a click onto the BGM and you'll see that it appears here. You'll notice there's one setting here of attenuation volume. And if you right click inside, not this top label bar, but inside of where it says volume and these stripes, you will see that there's expose volume of BGM to script. You're going to click on that, and you'll notice this little arrow appears. And down here in the top right corner of the audio mixer window, it says exposed parameters. If we click that, we see it says my exposed param, and then it lets us know it's the volume of the BGM group. You can right click on this and rename it. And I'm going to do that, and I'm going to call this BGM volume. And so this now will let us, we can access this through a script and say to change the BGM volume to something specific. I'm going to do this again for sound effects. We don't have any right now, but we'll need it in the future. So I'll click on the sound effects group. You can either click on it in the groups here or actually on this board. Right click on the volume, expose volume of SFX. Go back to the exposed parameters, and we're going to rename this to SFX volume. Do keep track of what you've named these and how you've done it, like caps and no caps, because we're going to be using strings to access these. Obviously, if you have a mistype, that can cause issues that you'll get errors in your console later. So with these in place, the last thing we need to do is go to our BGM player, either one of our instances, or even better, go to your project and go to your prefab. And now what we can do is we can use this output here. And this is an audio mixer group, which in this case we're going to use that background music that we created. So I'm going to click on the little targeting reticle there, and we're going to choose specifically the background music group. So now you'll see that's assigned there, and once again, if you go to one of your instances, you'll see that it's assigned across all of those as well. And so now what we can do is if I hit play right now, music starts playing, and if I go to audio mixer here, and I bring down, in order to edit inside of play mode, you have to check this edit in play mode, but now if I bring this down, you see that it's being controlled. And what's also nice is that if I do this, bring it down to here, and then I go to, say, the main menu, it stays controlled by this mixer. So this mixer controls everything across all of your scenes, while the background player is also moving across all your scenes. And so you're always going to have that setting that your player set the volume at. So I'm going to quickly stop this. I'm going to bring this back up to 0 for now. Now what we need to do is actually tell the script and the game that when we change these settings, that the audio mixer should reflect that. So how we're going to do that is we're going to go into our settings menu UI script, actually, because this is really where this is pretty much the only place this is ever going to get changed. And the first thing we need to do is we need to add a new library up here. We're going to say we're using Unity Engine.audio. In addition to this, we do need a public reference to our audio mixer so that we can tell it specifically that audio mixer should be used. You can have multiple audio mixer assets in your project, so we want to specify which one. So we're going to say here, public audio mixer, and I'm just going to call it mixer. Before I go any further, I am going to jump back to Unity and make sure that I add that mixer here. So if you go, you can either drag it from the audio mixer window, you can drag this here into there, or actually you cannot. Interesting. You do have to do it from your project, sorry. So I'm going to go into the audio folder, grab the asset itself, and then drop it in there, and that appears. Save that. Jump back over to Unity. Now that we know that's assigned and we're not going to get an error for forgetting to do that, what we can do is we're going to add a couple of quick things. There's a little bit of an issue here in that if we were to just try to assign like the value, either our inverted value or our slider value, if you look at the audio mixer, you'll see that 0 to 1 isn't a very big difference on this. Like it's there to there, and there's this whole range. Like down here at -80 is pretty much silent, and there's this whole range from silent all the way up to 0, and then when you get up here, it gets to be really loud. We're going to actually avoid these up here. We're just going to stick between 0 and -80. However, if we want from a bottom of -80 to a top of 0, we need to convert our slider value, which is 0 to 1, to this value. So we're going to create a quick method to do that. Down at the bottom of our settings menu script, I'm going to create a float. This is going to be a private method, and it's going to be called slider to mixer value. And it's going to take a float called slider value. So in here, we're going to basically just take our slider value that we pass in, which is typically going to be either of these two values, and then we're going to say times ADF. So at this point now, if it's at 1, it's going to be 80. If it's at 0, it's still 0. If it's somewhere in between, it'll be kind of normalized from 0 to 80. And then we're going to subtract 80 from it, so that if we were at 1, and we'll go all the way up to 80, now it's at 0. And if we were still at 0, it goes down to -80. So it's going to be somewhere between those two values that we want. And we do need to make sure that we return this so that this now gets returned as a value for us. Lastly, we need to make sure that when we save these settings, we actually apply this to the mixer. So what we'll do here is we'll say, when we choose to save the settings, mixer dot set float, and here is where we actually use that exposed parameter. Now what we can do is we can get the name of it. We had named it BGM volume, and we're going to set that equal to our slider to mixer value of our music dot value. Do note that you don't have to invert this because we're not using the saved value. We're actually using that raw value from 0 to 1. We don't want, in this case, for that to get switched up on us. While we're at it, we can actually do the same thing for our sound effects volume, even though we don't have anything being affected by it. But once again, we'll just say mixer.setFloat SFX volume slider to mixer value, and in this case, it'll be that SFX sliders value. So with that all in place, we can actually see this in action. We can go up here. We can hit play, and right now, sound effects are playing at 100%. But what we can do now is we can pull this down, let's say to 50%, and then if I hit save, you'll see that this drops all the way down. Now that actually gets very quiet. That's, you know, even negative 39 is actually probably quieter than we would need. So what we may want to do is adjust those values a little bit. Probably something maybe even between negative 40. Let's try bringing this up a little bit and seeing what happens. If I bring this down to negative 40, that's pretty silent. Probably, yeah, right around negative, maybe even negative 35. So let's quickly adjust that in our game here, or in our script. We're going to change this to about 35 and 35 for the range and the how far to offset it. Save that. And now when we hit play, if we bring this to about 50% and hit save, it's still pretty quiet, but it's better. You are hearing it. You can even do this in more of a logarithmic fashion or exponential so that it changes the curve a little bit. It's not just linear. But you get the basic idea that as you change these settings, turn this up again, hit save, it gets louder, you can hear it more. What this is really giving you is this way with the audio mixer to be able to control your volume across all of your scenes and throughout your game just by using a audio group that you can then assign audio sources to. What's really nice about this is for something like sound effects, what we can actually do is assign individual players to, say, that end of level goal, or if we had collectibles, but you would just simply assign all of those audio sources to the same group and they would all respect this sound effects, whatever that volume is set to. So this is all working well. In our next video, I think we're going to want to have the audio reflect its proper volume right when we start the game, so we're going to set that up. And then we can also look at creating some more dynamic music where it actually plays different music when you're playing the game versus you're just in the menus. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.